superficially at least, let's start superficially, it couldn't have gone better.
It could not have gone better. And I'm not even sure that I would use the word superficially. I think that Starmer had, before it happened, if you'd said Starmer would come back with a pretty clear indication that Trump is not going to impose tariffs on the UK, if he came back with warm words, at least, about Ukraine and Zelensky, and being persuaded to use the word backstop, though we can talk a bit more about that, in terms of any protection for Ukraine after any peace deal. And if he was able to get Trump to agree to put his thumbs up rather than his thumb down over the Chagos deal, that would have been a triple win, the most unlikely one. And that's what Starmer has pulled off. We spent a lot of our time talking about his failures and the disappointments of the government. This has been a really, really good day for Keir Starmer.
But was the thumb either up or down, or was it just in the middle with some positive language around it?
Well, if we take them in order, I think the language on a possible UK-US trade deal around AI and technology and what he said about tariffs seemed pretty strong. Now, of course, Trump is a mercurial guy, and yes, he can go back on anything, but that seemed pretty much a thumb up to me.
Yeah.
Chagos, it was a clear thumbs up. Now, on Zelensky, we have to wait and see what happens in the White House between Zelensky and Trump today.
Yeah.
But I have always thought that actually the minerals deal, which some people have described as the kind of rape of Ukraine's natural resources by a ruthless United States, was actually a very clever move. It originally came from President Zelensky. It was his idea originally. And the reason for that is that if the United States feels that it owns resources in Ukraine, and there may well not be nearly as many rare earth minerals as Donald Trump thought there were, but there's certainly oil and there's titanium and the graphite and all sorts of things. And they tend to be clustered quite in the east, quite close to the Russian front line. Now, if you are Putin, and if your new mate, Donald Trump, has just sent in his technicians and his engineers and so forth all across that part of Ukraine to deal with stuff he now regards as his, you don't walk across that. You don't send your troops across American business people working and engineers working there. And in a sense, that is the best tripwire that Ukraine could have. Stuff that Trump thinks he owns right up against the border with Russia.
And didn't Donald Trump actually allude to that when there was a question of what kind of support America would give to Ukraine post-war?
I thought he made it very clear that that is the way he is thinking as well. Now, it's a very, it appears to be much less secure than actually having American troops and American missiles or British troops there. But at the moment, Russia is absolutely clear it won't sign any deal that allows NATO troops inside Ukraine up close to that line of demarcation or armistice line, whatever it turns out to be. So I think this may be the best that Zelensky can get.
A smart move, almost embedding America in your country in that sense. Yeah. There was a moment, wasn't there, when Donald Trump was singing the praises of Britain, its armed forces, its historical strength, and all of that. And Keir Starmer talked about his pride in British armed forces, commitment to Ukraine, and then there was almost a kind of sort of metaphorical cuff that a parent might give to a toddler, saying, "Yeah, but can you deal with Russia on your own?" And that's the big question, isn't it?
It is the big question, and there was a kind of awkward half chuckle from Keir Starmer. He knew what was going on there. That was a bit of a power play, a classic power play from Trump. But of course, Trump is absolutely right about that. We are still very poorly defended as a country. Western Europe democracies are generally very poorly defended against Russia. We still need the Americans. And I thought it was also very interesting that Trump was prepared to talk about Article 5. That's the attack on one is an attack on all, part of the NATO Atlantic Treaty, Washington Treaty, because that is the really crucial thing. And if you talk to sort of senior politicians and diplomats who've been around, what they are really scared about is Trump's Washington indicating to Russia that Article 5 no longer really applies, because that would give the green light for the Russians if they wanted to go after the Baltic states, for instance. And so I thought that was a really, really important moment that Trump leaned into the kind of language that Keir Starmer would have wanted him to use.
And from the British voters' perspective on this visit, One of the criticisms levelled at Starmer is that he's boring, that he's sort of technocratic as a leader, rather than shows passion, shows character, shows humour, that kind of thing. And he has, I mean, certainly in the election campaign, he tread an incredibly careful route, didn't he? A careful line to get to where he's got to. Yesterday, that seemed to change a little in that yellow armchair that he was sitting in, handing the letter over from the king, all smiles, seemed to have won over the tricky US president. What do you think, or do you think it will change people's perceptions of Keir Starmer here?
Well, I hope so. I mean, I think, he's never been somebody to excite a room with extraordinary eloquence and oratory and a great big vision. That's not the kind of leader we have at the moment. But I think, if you think who else you would have preferred to be sitting in that armchair opposite this most mercurial, unpredictable, and dangerous of American presidents, I can't think of anybody that I would have preferred to see there than Keir Starmer. He is able to absorb kind of criticism without getting angry. There were brickbats thrown at him by Elon Musk and others and JD Vance, and he just let them bounce off him. He didn't get too angry. He's very, very careful with his use of language. He's very deliberate. He keeps his eye on the prize, and he understood exactly what he wanted to leave Washington with. And by being very self-disciplined and controlled, and if you like, a bit boring, and prepared to accept tiny little slights and tiny little biffs or pats, as you said, from Donald Trump, he's managed to do that.
It's like the precision of a lawyer, in a way.
The precision of a lawyer, but also, I think, the relative grown-up readiness to accept a certain amount of humiliation or a certain amount of embarrassment in the bigger for the wider cause. I can think of an awful lot of leftish European and Labour politicians who would have gone to Washington and really wanted to do a bit of grandstanding, a bit of Hugh Grant, we are who we are, and sort of get a bit of applause back home. It would have been a catastrophic mistake this weekend with this president. And, Starmer is a big enough and grown up enough politician to realise that.
I can't believe this thought actually came to my mind while I was watching the two of them together. But they, in a sense, and it kind of reflects what you just said, there was a bit of an Eric and Ernie vibe to them. That he knew he was the straight man.
He knew he was. That's very, very good. Yeah, I'll have that, said Berger.
You can have that for free.